Good morning, Gjalt. Thank you so much for joining me for a conversation on May the 20th, 2020, more than 2 months into lockdown. Can I ask for you just to introduce yourself, tell us where you are in the world and what you do for a job?
Yes, of course. Thank you very much for having me here. I'm Gjalt-Jorn Peters. I am an assistant professor of methodology and statistics at the Open University of the Netherlands. Even though I teach mostly methodology statistics, my actual substantive research is more about behavior change, specifically focused on nightlife related behaviors, like, just to give a wild example, substance use. And about 2 months ago, in my personal life, I came across an app about the coronavirus that actually was intended to help people estimate their risk. It was called the Pandemic Footprint, which of course is a nice, catchy title. So I played it and I showed it to my partner, and she said, well, this is very nice, but none of my friends is going to do this because it's in English. And then I realized that actually, obviously, most people only use these kinds of things in their normal language, their primary language. So I thought maybe it would be a good idea to start creating something like that ourselves. And then we got together some volunteers, and from there it kind of got out of hand.
But before you start telling us about the app, I kind of probably want to make sure people understand more about your background. So you and I have worked together because of your involvement in the party panel and global drug survey, and you're an expert in the theory behind behavior change, particularly for clubbers and drug use, but then translating that into specific trigger points in someone's decisional process to get them to make the right decision. I mean, I know I've heard you talk, and it lays a theory on the stuff I stumble through. And I've been always hugely impressed by the strong theoretical background that you've moved forward in. So when I came across the app that you developed, I just went, such a smart thing. So can you so you said it was inspired by something called the Pandemic Footprint, catchy name, but yeah, not very engaging. Tell us what the app is that you've created and how it works and how you hope it will bring about behavior change.
One of the differences is with the Pandemic Footprint is that we focus to a large degree on what happens after people fill out the questions. So the Pandemic Footprint asks you some questions and then gave you a number from 0 to 1,000 with some recommendations, which were basically just links to Twitter posts of people giving some advice. And as you indicated, I've been studying behavior change for quite a while now. So when I looked at it through that lens, I thought, well, there's some room for improvement here. So what we did is that we got together this team of volunteers that I knew through the society, the European Society for Health Psychology. And we basically thought about how can we approach this more systematically using this theory. So we had a number of parallel tracks. One track was about establishing the risk model, figuring out how, with as few questions as possible, we can find out what we need to know to give a risk estimate. So we used some surveys and asked virologists, epidemiologists to give input on these so that we could actually build the risk model and knew what to ask. The second part was about thinking about what do people actually need to behave in a way that minimizes their risk. Because actually, once you get the risk model, then you know your risk model, but that's it, that won't actually help you to do anything. So the question is, what do people need to do? What are the most important behaviors? And what are the things people stumble on? And how can we give them supportive messages that help them to change these? And we have like a model underlying this that's actually one of the things I think is most interesting about the app. This model allows us to change this, to update this over time. So the whole tool is actually built to iteratively improve itself. That's why we also ask the tool users if they want to answer some more questions, which we actually won't use for the risk estimate, but we will use it to make the second version better so that we know exactly how to support them, in this case, in keeping distance.
So that goes beyond artificial intelligence and machine learning. You're levering off actual participants at the time of completion as they're going through their own risk assessment process and review of their behaviors to give you feedback how to make it better.
Well, yes and no. We give them feedback on how to make things better based on the answers on their behavior. The answers they give about why they actually do or don't keep enough distance, that's not how we phrase it. We actually ask how they see the world. And then we link their representation of the world to what they do. And then we can figure out, hey, people who actually, who are much more worried about how others see them, that's actually one of the biggest predictors of not keeping enough distance. And once we know that, we'll be able to target this in the second version of the tool and help those people who care a lot to actually think about this differently.
So you're harnessing the power of social desirability bias. People want to be seen to do the right thing. You're suggesting that actually might be a more powerful motivator for behavior change than reduce your own risk of contracting COVID.
Well, this is actually, that's a very interesting response. This touches exactly upon one of the things that we as behavior change people tend to do most of the time. Most of the time when people want to help people change their behavior, what we end up doing is when we work with them, tell them we shouldn't think about the solution. We shouldn't think about what we think causes people to behave in a certain way. That's not the point. No, we have to switch it around. We don't actually know, so we have to figure it out. So we have a long list of questions. People don't get all the questions. We have a long list of questions of reasons that may be important, and social desirability is definitely one of them. Others relate to the perceived risk of infection, or that you might be perceived as being silly, or whatever, that you don't want to disappoint people, that you don't want to feel isolated. All those potential things that might all play a role, we ask people those questions, and then we do the analyses to actually figure out what are, for different countries or different groups of people, the most important things where they actually need support. And then we can use this to make the second version better, to give them the kind of support they need.
Amazing. Can I ask, what's been the response of the people who have taken part? Are they walking away with something they didn't know, or are they simply getting reinforcement of government messages on wash your hands, don't cough into your hands, clean surfaces, maintain your distance?
I think a little bit of both. To a degree, of course, those government messages have also been informed by behavior change experts if the government does it right. So to a degree, those messages will overlap. There will just be some things that are the best things to tell people. To a degree, of course, because we have had over 100 volunteers working on this. So we also have a lot of input that won't be present in those government communications. I don't actually know the average response, because we didn't include questions about these because we wanted to keep the questions to a minimum. And we didn't want to ask open questions because we wanted to make sure everything was completely anonymous, because we make the data publicly available immediately. And that's much harder if you have to de-identify it first. We did pilot test it quite a lot. And of course, as the pilot testing improved, people indicated that the messages were clear. The degree to which each of the messages was novel, we didn't test, because we wanted to get this online as quickly as possible. That's why we engineered it such that we can improve it over time.
Did you look at the impact of social norms or using social norms to modify people's behavior?
No, because this is not actually an intervention study. We don't look at whether this is effective. This would require us to be able to ask people after a month, or maybe given how fast this coronavirus epidemic is spreading, maybe after 1 or 2 weeks. So what happens? How often did you manage to keep enough distance, for example? And then we'd have to compare different types of interventions. That's like a real scientific study. What we did actually was more use the scientific knowledge to create a tool to help people rather than study something.
So you say it's not an intervention trial as such. Are you able to evaluate what the impact has been on people's behavior or not?
No, not at all. This would require a study and therefore a grant, where you can actually recruit participants, give a part of the participants this tool, give part of the participants a version of this tool without the messages that are supposed to have an effect, and then compare those two. You would basically need an RCT, which we can't do for free and quickly.
If you had a sample of participants, what else would you need?
We'd need ethical approval, which would take a while. And we need to have an infrastructure somewhere that would allow us to GDPR compliantly collect personal data from these people and then ask them again. after a while.
Okay. It's definitely something you and I should probably talk about beyond this, because it's such a fascinating approach. It would be such a shame not to have the ability to evaluate also such a novel approach of improving in real time the questions you're answering and how you're feeding it back. I mean, it's beautiful. So at the moment, it's just available in Dutch.
Well, we launched, since you looked at it probably, we also launched an Amharic, which is spoken in Ethiopia and maybe other countries. We launched Greek, which is spoken mostly, well, the volunteer group is mostly from Cyprus, but it's also obviously spoken in Greece. We launched Turkish, will be launched, I think, today. And Romanian launched on Monday.
And will it be available in English?
Yes, it will. But because like English is like the language with the most speakers, we are rolling it out kind of slowly because we're not sure. The point is that it's kind of unpredictable, you know. If it happens to be picked up by the media, you might get a big spike, and then the servers might not be able to deal with it. So that's why we.
For people who want to have a look at it, where do they find it? I mean, we'll obviously put the URL up, but what's the name of the project?
It's your COVID-19 risk, your COVID-19 risk. So it's basically your-COVID-19-risk.com. Okay. But that's only has the other languages, of course. But next week, it will also be available in English. So
we'll make sure this goes out on May the 25th, 26th. So when this goes live, people will be able to
we can coordinate like the time.
And what I'll also do is we'll make sure if you want that we share your email. So if other researchers are watching this or other groups in other countries and they want to inquire about how they can join, then hopefully they can reach out for you. So look, thank you so much for just telling us a little bit about. It just sounds such an amazing project. And yeah, and again, I think it works. It works because you've used theory, you're using people who want to help. I mean, it's fantastic. Super impressed, as always.
Thank you very much.
Safe. And yeah, we'll have to come back to you and get a follow-up, Gjalt, and see.
Yeah, we can definitely do it.
See what happens. All right. Take care.
Just taking it one day at a time. Still don't know what I'm trying to find. Really I don't mind, cause I'll be fine. Yeah, I'll be fine. Yeah, no longer focused on yesterday. And I